Good evening, and welcome to Hello It's Us, Perspectives on Inclusion. This program is dedicated to educating the general public about issues which are important to people with disabilities. But we believe that those of you viewing this will recognize that those same issues are important to everybody because people with disabilities are certainly part of the community at large. Hello It's Us is brought to you through a collaboration between the University of Iowa Center for Disabilities and Development, our friends at Uptown Bill's Coffee Shop, and our good friends and colleagues here at Public Access Television. My name is Mike Honig. I am a program coordinator at the Center for Disabilities and Development, and I serve as a co-host for Hello It's Us. Keith?
My name is Keith. Well, I'm the other co-host. And I'm retired, but not from advocating for disability issues. And I published my first book a few months ago. So welcome, Amy.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yes, thank you so much for coming back. For those of you that tuned in to episode 1 of our mini-series, this is our annual legislative post-session wrap-up. And we're very happy to have Representative Mary Masher from House District 86 and Representative Amy Nielsen from House District 77 joining us. Mary is from Iowa City and Amy is from North Liberty. So we have some local people here to talk about certainly how issues affect people with disabilities, and that we recognize that we have a local, state, and hopefully national and international audience. So a lot of the issues that we're dealing with locally and at the state level, I'm sure are issues that are being dealt with by other constituencies across the country as well. So we're just going to dive right into this. And during the first episode, we had a little bit of a reference to the HHS, Health and Human Services budget, and one of the things that obviously is a major concern to many people with disabilities and their families is Medicaid managed care. And we've talked about it a lot on our programs in the past, but it's one of the subjects that really touches the lives of so many people. And since we last met, we've had some changes. We have a new Managed Care Organization, or MCO, coming in. We have another MCO that is leaving the state of Iowa, United Healthcare. And so, and during the legislative session, I don't know, Keith, I don't know if you'd heard, but I know I've certainly heard some discussion about the possibility that the long-term services and supports portion would be shifted away from the MCOs because it just does not fit the model. And people with disabilities, and whether they be kids, adults, family members, are really getting the short end of things. So we've now seen that there is some increase. I saw approximately $150 million into the budget, and I believe you mentioned it during our first program, going to to Medicaid managed care. So I guess one of the concerns that I have is that how much of that is being fed into the MCO pockets, how much of any of it is going to benefit people with disabilities, and then if one of or both of you could talk about the status of moving the long-term services and supports out of managed care.
And if I may, how much of that money is going to keeping people with disabilities as independent as possible.
We could do a whole show on this, Mike. There are so many pieces to it. One of the things that we really worked hard on is trying to get more oversight for the managed care companies. And we have been fought tooth and nail with the Republicans in providing that oversight. I think that's one of the concerns we've had. We have had concerns from not only constituents who are not getting the services they need, but also our providers who aren't getting paid on time.
Exactly.
Or only receiving partial payments. And again, they can't keep in business and provide the care that's needed if they are not compensated adequately. So it's those two issues, and that's where we get most of our emails from, is people saying, I am struggling, I cannot get the services I need, or it's a provider saying, I can't provide the services if I don't get paid. And so those are, two of the major issues that we've had with the MCOs. The long-term disability issue is one that we have been harping on for a long time and saying they should not be part of the Medicaid managed care system, because those individuals need the help and the care, and they need the continuity and the consistency. And that's where, again, we run into the problem. If they can't find people to provide the services, we've had people leave this area because of that. And I think that's just wrong when you have individuals who need those services, are going to need them for their entire life, and yet they are not receiving them in the way they should be. So that's why I'm hopeful that we can actually move in that direction and get something done, because that is certainly needed, and we've been told that time and time again. Any other things that you see as problems with that?
Well, I would certainly agree with you, Mary. I think one of the harder things to hear this session was when you had representatives actually stand up and say things like, well, there's no money to be made off of people with disabilities.
Oh my gosh.
They'd say that. That's exactly right.
That actually happens, and it did. Yes, it did. And so, at Medicaid, the Medicaid privatization has been bad for all Iowans on Medicaid, but it's been especially catastrophic and, quite frankly, deadly to people with long-term disabilities.
Yeah.
And we need to acknowledge that. Somebody needs to be held accountable for the lives that have been lost because of the poorly managed care and just the disaster of this privatization. I've been hearing lately stories of children who have disabilities or even terminal diagnosis where their life expectancy is not very long, and they require equipment. A little guy who needs a wheelchair, and the story I heard was the managed care representative actually said, well, unfortunately, he's outlived his life expectancy.
Oh my.
So we will not be able to give him a wheelchair because he's grown, because we already bought him one.
Unreal.
And Iowans are hearing this, and they're dealing with this, and there is no recognition from our leadership, from our governor, from our majority party, just no recognition that there is absolutely no care. Even not even just like medical care provided, but there's no care. There's no human care for Iowans, and it's just really disgusting. I have several of these stories that I've been getting recently, and it just breaks my heart and it makes me sick.
I can speak to that. I had to wait 9 months for this year.
That's crazy, Keith. That makes no sense
9
at all.
months.
Well, and just think, and it's so interesting because on the one hand, Iowa, I keep going back to the Olmsted Supreme Court decision, and you think about what Iowa actually has. One of the things that always comes out of these legislative shows is that I go back and think, okay, what can, it's good to educate everybody, but what can we do? What can we do at the grassroots level? And, I know that Iowa has an Olmsted Consumer Task Force. And I think, these things, when I think about both, those stories about the little guy not getting his chair, and then about, people, like you said, Mary, that are moving, sometimes
Right.
moving out of state, we're not providing an environment. On the one hand, they've talked about wanting to move, to save money, to move people back to Iowa. And it's certainly consistent with the Olmsted decision to do that, to give people the chance to live in the least restrictive environment. And then when the services are not there to support that environment, that seems very contradictory. So this may be something that that we need to get that task force fired up about a little bit here.
Right, and you know, if you think about it, Mike, obviously, the fact that we're having another MCO leave tells you it's not working for them either.
Exactly.
And so it isn't working for our constituents, it's not working for them, we know that. It's not working for the providers, and it's not working for the MCOs. There have been other states like Connecticut who started into a privatization, realized it wasn't working for their people, and changed it back to a state-run system. So it's not like that isn't possible. I just think it's gonna take a lot of people really and truly hitting with the governor and talking to their constituents or their legislators about why this is not beneficial for Iowans. The fact that they're starting to look at long-term care and making sure that those folks are being taken care of differently and maybe going back to the state-run system tells you that they recognize there is a definite problem and a need to make some changes.
What I like to know is some these NGOs realize someday they're gonna need that.
They could be in those chairs too, right, Keith?
Yes,
That's exactly right.
Yeah, like there's no human care, there's just no care for your fellow
Empathy,
human being.
yeah,
Empathy,
just the
That's
empathy,
the money-making thing in
Yeah.
healthcare, and that's,
unfortunate,
yeah.
isn't it?
Well, it's especially with a public needs-based system. I mean,
Yeah, well, and if you look at how much we're spending on administrative costs,
yeah.
that used to go directly to the people.
yeah.
And that's changed, and to me, that's what's abhorrent about the whole system. The fact that we're now paying all of those administrative costs and basically paper pushers, when we could be paying for the direct services that people need.
Like I said in the last show, we could put that money towards helping people become more independent
That's right.
and self-sufficient.
And that should be the goal,
Yes.
is to be able to allow people to stay as independent as they can for as long as they can.
Yeah.
And right now, that is not happening, so need some changes.
Yes. Well, let's, for a couple more minutes, I know that, we've talked a little bit, well, a lot now about Medicaid managed care. One of the things that happened this year was that a state behavioral health, children's mental health system has come into place. And I'd like to have both of your thoughts on that, whether it's, or I guess I shouldn't say it's come into place, right? It's
It's the
passed,
beginnings, we've kind of got the framework for it, Mike, is what we did this year. Obviously, there's been a need for a children's mental health system for a long
Yeah.
time. And we've had the adult system in place. We have some issues with that still need to be resolved. But we wanted to start a children's system that would really and truly work. And so we looked at how are we going to do the governance of that, how are we going to fund it, what kinds of things are we going to do in terms of the services, and especially the crisis intervention that we need. Because we have a lot of students out there and young people who are dealing with suicide and are dealing with depression issues and severe mental health issues that need to be addressed. And so what we've been doing is looking at what are the basic frameworks that need to be put in place. The thing that concerned both Representative Nielsen and I were, how are you going to fund this? Because right now, we've got the framework in place, we still do not have the funding piece in place. And unless you have that, it seems to me, again, we needed to be able to identify how are we going to pay for this. And that was pretty critical in our discussions on the floor with, you've got to show us how we're actually going to do this, or else it's just words. It doesn't mean a whole lot unless you actually have not only the framework, but the funding to back it up.
Yeah,
Any
I
other things?
don't think there's much more to add. I think
Yeah.
you really nailed it there.
I think one of the things I'm curious about, though, when you mentioned that about the number of students and children that are experiencing depression
Yeah,
and completing or attempting suicide,
Right.
I was fortunate enough for several years to teach a program called Mental Health First Aid, which was designed to help, and there was a youth version of it too, which is designed to help people basically to provide first aid to a person who may be experiencing a mental health crisis until professional help can get onto the scene. So I know that there have been some federal initiatives, not recently, unfortunately, but there were some federal initiatives a few years ago which really helped to bring this training to Iowa and other states. I wonder whether it's mental health first aid or other types of training, because it's only one of many, but did the bill or did the infrastructure include training of professionals working in the field as a part of the interventions?
So one of the pieces was money for teacher education. And so that teachers in the classroom, and the mental health first aid is one of the programs that has been used through the Grantwood AEAs, our AEA systems. And this is what would be provided for our school districts. The AEAs would do the training, and then the teachers would be able to implement that within their classrooms. And not that they would be the providers of the mental health treatment, but they would be able to identify students that are struggling and be able to refer them for additional help and support. So that's all part of this bill, and obviously the money for that was cut back some. It had been originally $3 million, and then I don't remember, was it 2.6 or 2.5 at the end? So they cut back some of that going to the AEAs for the purposes of the training. And so again, we're hopeful that this can be implemented through the AEA system, more teachers becoming more aware of what to look for within their classrooms when a student's struggling. I know we had a student here that had said, she knew a good friend who was in high school that was bulimic and was having troubles with that, and she said, I felt like I didn't even know where to refer her because she's low income, and I can't imagine that anybody would be willing to provide that kind of long-term treatment that she needs to be able to get the help. And she said, so I felt like sometimes as students, we can identify it too, because students can also be trained in that mental health first aid, and they're oftentimes ones that know things before even the teachers do. And so I think it's important that students also have that knowledge and are also able to help with referrals for their own friends.
Amen to that.
Yeah.
And training the teachers and the students and the administrators to spot and identify these things is great, and I think it's a wonderful, step. It's a wonderful tool to have. The problem is, where are they going to refer them to after they've identified the problem? Because we're cutting funding to the schools so that there's less, school counselors or resource centers, nurses. There's less school nurses. The AEAs have been. I think their budget's been cut in almost half in recent years, and it's great to identify a problem and then put some steps in, but it has to be a complete plan. You can't just throw some really exciting things there at the beginning and then say, oh, we fixed it. It's a big deal. It's a big problem, and it's going to take a big solution. And we do a lot of things very incrementally and slowly. I think we talked about in the last program. And sometimes that's good, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes you really need to just eat the whole elephant.
And what we have is a lack of providers. Right now, we don't have enough psychiatrists, psychologists, nurse practitioners, physician's assistants who have specialty in mental health for children. And so we don't have enough for adults, let alone our children population. And so we've got to address that, the shortage of providers. And so that's all got to be part of the discussion.
We need to save this population coming up. If we don't, we're gonna be on the negative spiral.
That's exactly right, Keith. We're going to lose a whole generation of kids if we don't start intervening early on in their lives. You bet.
Keith, you said I know that you, speaking of that issue, and one of the primary responsibilities, I know that we've done a lot of educating of young people on is voting. And I know that was, you had wanted to chat about voting a little bit.
I wanted to know, from both of you, how do you feel on the voting rights balance.
Let you start with that
Sure,
one, Amy.
okay, thanks. Yeah, I was encouraged at the beginning of the session to hear that it was a priority of our governor and that maybe we were gonna see
Yeah.
something happen. You know, the problem is that if it really is something that our governor's interested in, a priority for her, she could fix it today. She could fix it yesterday. She only has to sign an executive order that restores voting rights. The same, she basically would reverse the executive order that Governor Branstad signed to take them away. So I think that a lot of maybe the credit and the kudos that are being given to the governor right now are very disingenuous, because if she really cared about it, she could make it happen.
That's right.
And to hear, you know, in the House, and I think in the Senate also, there was talk about, well, we can restore rights, but only after certain conditions are met. And so that's not okay. I mean, that's punishing people twice, you know, making them pay all their fees and fines and things like that. That's just continuing to punish and hurt people who have, you know, they've done their time and they've paid their debt to society, just not monetarily, and I don't think that that's okay to put that as an obstacle to them, you know, becoming productive members and contributing members of society again. It's really disheartening to see that was thrown into the mix and into the
Yeah.
conversation.
I think Iowa is one of 2 states that doesn't restore voting rights automatically. And
Wow.
we have these enormous hoops that people have to jump through right now in order to get those rights back. And you almost need an attorney to actually get it done. And that's ridiculous to think that somebody would have to hire somebody to actually fill out the paperwork in order for them to get their voting rights restored. Governor Vilsack had signed the executive order that Representative Nielsen's talking about, and it automatically restored the voting rights for individuals who had been in prison. And that seems to me what the governor, if she really is sincere about this, the constitutional amendment we could continue to move on and work towards, but we should restore the rights now, and she should do that today. There's no reason for her to delay that, and it just delays people from becoming full citizens again after they've served their time.
As it is, America is the leading country in incarcerated
That's right.
people.
Yeah.
We're number 1 or number 2, either one.
Yeah.
I think we're number 1, and disproportionately we
Yeah.
incarcerate
Yeah.
our minority
Yeah.
population, and so
Right.
there's so many barriers in place for you know, people of color in this state
Yes.
and in this country, and this is just another one of those things that we're trying to throw out there to
Yeah.
make it harder for
People
our minority
to
population.
live, period.
That's
Mhm.
right.
Yeah.
And Keith, if you think about it, what we've done, not only are minorities, but we've incarcerated the mentally ill.
Yes.
Oh my
And we
gosh.
closed the institutions and said we don't want people in, you know, housed in institutions, which was fine. But what was missing is we needed local services and locations for people to be able to live and be productive. We never did that. And as a result, we left people out on their own without any kind of support. And as a result, what we've seen is people get in trouble with the law, they immediately incarcerate, and those people are in prisons when they should be receiving services in the community.
Or help
Or help of some
to
kind.
get out of it.
Yes.
That's right.
Yeah, it's just really amazing to think about, you know, and I think I had a friend that, well, it was a couple, and one of them had worked in the prison system and one in mental health, and the 2 of them, and the number of people that started out, you know, being served in the mental health system and ended up in prison that they knew in common. It was
Yeah.
just staggering.
It tells you something,
It
though,
does,
doesn't it,
yeah.
in terms of what we're lacking.
It really does.
Because we're running out of time. Today on NPR, I heard about the Glenwood situation.
Yeah.
What do you think?
You know, I think it's a combination. What they've done, Keith, is cut the staff there. And if you've got fewer medical people and then fewer people taking care of individuals, then people are gonna get lost in the system. And I think that's unfortunate. There are families who really like Glenwood and feel like that's a good placement for their family member. There are others who would rather have them closer to home. And I think both options have to be available. You can't have just one without the other. You need to be able to provide families those options.
Can you, for those of us that didn't, or for those viewers out there, is there a specific issue that happened at Glenwood, or is it just over?
Just another death, right, Keith?
Oh, just another.
Just another.
8 people
Yeah,
so within a couple years
yeah,
or a year.
yeah. And the Department of Human Services is claiming, well, the population's getting older, so you would anticipate this. But even when the population was still aging,
Yeah.
there weren't these numbers of deaths. And
Right.
so then I think you have to go back to the employees who have worked there that have said we've cut and cut and cut the employees so that people aren't getting the care they deserve. And that's an enormous problem and should be addressed.
Do you think it will be an issue in the next session?
It should be.
It should be, yeah.
It should be. And if not, we'll make sure it becomes a part of the discussion.
That's good. We have a couple minutes left, and I know, so we won't be able to talk about it at great length, but I know Representative Masher, you brought up an issue, and Representative Nielsen, you said too, this is an important one, and that has to do with buying out of mobile home parks, and the impact that it has on people residing in those parks. Obviously, that has all sorts of ramifications for housing and income and so forth. So would really appreciate if the two of you would introduce this issue and kind of fill us in on where things stand presently.
Sure. Well, I mean, there's a out-of-state company that has come into Iowa and built and bought up some of the mobile home parks. One of them in North Liberty in my district, and another big one in Waukee. And I think that there's potential that a couple more are being bought soon. But what they do is they come in, they buy these mobile home parks, and then they immediately jack up the rents, 60 and 70%, and they give 30 to 60 days notice that the rent is going up. And unfortunately, this is a trend that's happening nationwide, where mobile homes are kind of our last non-subsidized source of affordable housing. And we've got people who are looking at it as a way to make money, an investment opportunity. You can go online and you can find actual mobile home university where they'll teach you how to go in and how to maximize your investment returns. And it's things like those people have nowhere to go. What are they going to do? They may own the mobile home, but they don't own the land underneath it. And moving one of those is actually not quite as easy as you might think. It's a good $3,000 to $5,000 to move a mobile home, and so there's the excuse of, well, rates haven't kept up with inflation. There's a lot of updates and things that we're planning on doing in the park that'll better amenities for the residents. Well, you know what? The residents maybe don't want all of these amenities. They don't want a pool, or they don't want these things that that these companies are saying they're going to come in and give. They want a safe and healthy place to live that they can afford. And I had, upon finding out about this, I had introduced an amendment to a bill that would help alleviate this problem a little bit in the future, but unfortunately it was shot down. And so I'm hoping that next year we can have some legislation that might address it.
That's critical.
Yeah.
Well, and I'm sorry we didn't get to your comments on that, Mary, but we are once again. I always say this: we need to plan three episodes, but this time just does go so quickly. And I want to thank both of you again, Representative Masher and Representative Nielsen, for making time for us and for our viewership, and for addressing some really, really critical issues for people with disabilities. So, and people in general. So. Thank you again to all of you and to our sponsors once again, and to all of you out there in YouTube land and TV land. So Keith, bring us home here.
Everybody out there, have a very enjoyable week. Thank you. Good night.